Good evening once again. The program begins right now. Let me begin with our top story tonight, where at least 17 people have died in northwestern Democratic Republic of Congo, where health officials have now confirmed an outbreak of Ebola. Congo's Ministry of Health said in a statement the 2 cases of the virus have been confirmed by laboratory test following 21 patients displaying signs of hemorrhagic fever in Ikoko Impenge near the town of Bikoro in the Central African nation. This is the 9th time an Ebola outbreak has been recorded in the DRC. The virus was first discovered there in 1976 and is named after the Ebola River. Ebola, which has no proven cure, killed more than 11,000 people in West Africa from the year 2013 as it swept through Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia. Now, Kenya and Djibouti today signed 4 agreements aimed at boosting trade and deepening bilateral links. The agreements were signed at State House, Nairobi, where President Uhuru Kenyatta hosted Djibouti President Ismail Omar Gule, who is on a 3-state visit to Kenya. The agreements signed included trade agreement, MOU on bilateral cooperation in the livestock sector, agreement on reciprocal promotion and protection of investments, and an agreement on visa exemption for holders of diplomatic passports. The agreements were signed shortly after President Kenyatta and President Gule held bilateral talks focusing on trade and security.
Regain peace and stability, selfish interest. We are sincere during our meeting in your office that
Now, nearly 500 organizations and 140 leading economists worldwide are calling on parties at the Bonn climate meetings to address fossil fuel production and financing to ensure that Paris Agreement goals can be met. Our Foreign Affairs editor, Lilian Odera, is at the ongoing climate talks in Bonn and has filed this report. Take a look.
We are here at the World Conference Center in Bonn, Germany, where technical experts and parties to the 2015 Paris Climate Change Agreement have been putting pen to paper to a technical working document that would form the rule book to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Essentially what that means is it is that rule book that will guide the world on how to deal with the effects of climate change. Now, there are 2 possible scenarios out of this conference by the end of this week. One, either there will be an agreement that will be presented during the next climate change conference, that is COP24, to be held in Poland later this year. The second option is that if there's no agreement, there's going to be another technical session to be convened in Bangkok ahead of that COP24 summit. Now, 2 key issues that are also under discussion here in Bonn is one, the issue of financing. Remember the issue around the commitment by developed nations to contribute $100 billion to help developing countries mitigate the effects of climate change has come up again. There's been concern that the developed nations are not moving with speed, and 2, there is no clear roadmap as to when and how that money will be produced. The second issue is that there are conversations that are going on that are called sustained conversations under the Talanoa dialogue that are aimed at sustaining the interest, the global interest in discussions around the issue of climate change. Now, one of the key takeouts from this conference is that the issue of agriculture, which was really being pushed by developed nations, has been recognized as a major factor. Agriculture and especially the developing countries feel that they have suffered the most. The agricultural sector has suffered the most as a result of climate change. Now, I am here with a delegation of Kenyans, also around about 30. Kenya had a delegation of about 30 people. One of those persons is Mr. Michael Okumu, who is a Senior Assistant Director in charge of climate change negotiations here in Bonn. Let me now talk to him. Mr. Okumu, maybe you can start by telling us what is your general assessment of the talks so far?
Well, so far, the progress of the talks is fine, although there has been a lot of dilly-dallying over issues of support. As expected, we had expected that we would be able to get very nice goodwill, especially from developed countries, to be able to support most of the climate action in developing countries. And unfortunately, that is not coming out very clearly, although we are still trying to convince them to see from our perspective on how issues are at the developing countries. A good case in point is Kenya. As we are well aware, we started this year very terribly with a very terrible drought, and there were a lot of losses, for instance, by farmers. Livestock died due to drought. Currently, most of our farms are underwater in Kenya, but all these are due to extreme weather events as a result of climate change.
Now we wait and see what is the final outcome at the end of this session that is coming Thursday, whether there's going to be any agreements or not, and which would be the clear way forward when it comes to climate change. Reporting from Bonn, Germany, at the World Conference Center, I'm Lilian Odera for KTN News.
Now, President Donald Trump signed a presidential memorandum this morning withdrawing the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal and reinstating nuclear and economic sanctions on the Iran regime. The landmark accord was established in 2015 with the then President Barack Obama.
Mr. President, how does this make America safer? How does this make America safer?
I want to deliver a message to the long-suffering people of Iran. The people of America stand with you. It has now been almost 40 years since this dictatorship seized power and took a proud nation hostage. Powerful sanctions will go into full effect. If the regime continues its nuclear aspirations, it will have bigger problems than it has ever had before.
Well, Trump's move has sparked various reactions around the globe. So many people have been shocked by that move by the U.S. president and by extension the U.S. government. Take a look.
Former U.S. President Barack Obama in a statement said Trump's decision is so misguided. The reality is clear. The JCPOA, that is Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, is working. That is a view shared by our European allies, independent experts, and the current U.S. Secretary of Defense. Iran's supreme leader challenged President Trump, and I quote, "You cannot do a damn thing." United Kingdom Foreign Minister Boris Johnson tweeted, "Deeply regret U.S. decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. UK remains strongly committed to the JCPOA and will work with partners and other parties to maintain it. Await more detail on U.S. plan." Saudi Arabia supported President Trump in an official statement saying, "The kingdom reaffirms its support of the strategy previously announced by President Trump towards Iran and hopes the international community will take a firm and a unified stance against the Iranian regime and its destabilization aggression in the region. Its support to terrorist groups, particularly Hezbollah and the Houthis militias, and its support of the Assad regime, who has committed heinous crimes against its people that led to the death of more than 500,000 civilians, including through the use of chemical weapons." Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that the U.S. would be the ones to lose. Iran will never compromise on this agreement and will abide by this agreement to the end.
Now, delegates attending the 4th edition of the Transform Africa Summit, an annual continental tech gathering in Kigali, Rwanda, are advocating for the advancement of an African single digital market. In the following conversation with KTN's Eugene Anangwe, Dr. Hamadoun Toure, the Executive Director of Smart Africa, shares more on the summit, why the African single digital market should be seen as a facilitator of economic integration in Africa and the rest of the world, and the role of the private sector in achieving this ambition. Here's the interview.
As you know, in our manifesto, one of the key principles is, one of the 5 principles is private sector first. Giving the opportunity to private sector will, because they have the means, they have the technology, and they have the investment opportunities. If we develop the right PPP models, private sector will be able to develop also entrepreneurship, which will in turn create jobs for our youth. And there's no other challenge that we face today bigger than youth unemployment.
You know, you talk of developing proper PPPs, and the question would be, what sort of models would you want to see in developing these right private-public partnerships in order to have the private sector plug into, you know, the Smart Africa manifesto?
Well, we want to give opportunity for private sector to evolve first. And for that, you need to create the necessary legal and regulatory framework for them to evolve, and to evolve in a larger market, larger than their own individual countries, at the regional level or the continental level. That will make them bigger. Where private sector cannot invest, and there are some areas where they may not necessarily see it as a profit-making, government may come in, trigger the demand, and have a public-private partnership with them so that they can start working, and later on private sector can take over completely.
Right. We understand that this year's theme for Transform Africa Summit is accelerating Africa's single digital market, and some people could be wondering, why this focus, why now? I mean, especially when it comes to looking at the acceleration that you want to see happening in this single digital market.
Timing is perfect. As you know, as I said, we've signed, our heads of state have signed the free trade agreement. But this decision of this theme was taken last year at the summit in May last year. You see, this shows that timing is perfect. Creating a single digital market for Africa is key for us to attract industry, to attract the manufacturing industry, to create opportunities for softwares to be developed in Africa, to give opportunity for our young entrepreneurs to be more creative, to give opportunity for women to exercise their full right of being part of this digital revolution. The market size of $1.2 billion, which is over $3.4 trillion GDP combined, that's a very huge market force. I'm talking about the ICT industry alone. And this market force will be able to drag the other sectors of the industry, from health, e-health, education, e-education, agriculture. I mean, you name it. All the sectors will benefit from a single digital market in the ICT sector.
So the bottom line here is tapping into the opportunities that we already have here. But talking of the kind of conversations that we should be expecting during this summit with regards to this theme, what sort of discussions, what sort of practical points that you could be able to tell us that you should be expecting to see during this?
We're expecting to see the digital economy as a theme that will be discussed here. What are the goodies that are coming with it? What are the challenges we are facing? What are the regulatory environments that we need to put in place to attract more of that? We're talking about e-health. It will be very widely discussed. We have invited the Director General of WHO and some other specialists. We have invited ministers of finance so that they'll be here, because we'll be talking about digital money, cryptocurrency. I mean, we are inviting women leaders as well, because we want to give a big importance to women in this field as well. But youth will be our biggest asset in this conference, because We are going to create opportunities for entrepreneurs. We're going to trigger more startups in the continent so that in turn they create opportunities, there's more creativity on the continent. We're going to assist them in terms of intellectual property rights, because when these young people innovate, we need to make sure that their discoveries or their inventions are protected intellectually so that they can benefit from it. And all of those will be happening during this summit.
Thank you, Eugene Anangwe, for that interview. Now, from Rwanda, let me take you over to another story here. The World Health Organization on Monday announced that it has launched the largest cholera vaccine campaign in history in Africa to help more than 2 million people to get access to oral cholera vaccine. The vaccines funded by the Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, were sourced from the global stockpile and are being used to carry out 5 major campaigns in Zambia, Uganda, Malawi, South Sudan, and Nigeria. The oral cholera vaccine is recommended to be given in 2 doses. The first gives protection for 6 months, the second for 3 to 5 years. All 5 campaigns shall have completed their second round of vaccination by mid. It's the world's largest cholera vaccine drive ever, which is scheduled to use over 15 million doses in the first 4 months alone of 2018, the WHO said. In comparison, in the 15 years between 1997 and 2012, just 1.5 million doses of cholera vaccines were used worldwide. Mamadou Haruna Dingare, Infection Hazard Management, WHO Africa, is the one, of course, who we quoted there.
We have the knowledge of how to control cholera. We have the tools to control cholera. We have a strategy with our partners in the Global Task Force, which includes our colleagues in UNICEF, IFRC, CDC, the Gates Foundation, and many others, as well as the countries that are affected. We have the partnership to do this. The real question is, do we have the collective will and commitment to do that over a decade?
Over the last 10 years, from 2006 to 2016, we have more than 752,000 cases of cholera reported in Africa, with more than 17,000 deaths.
Over to some development in the youngest nation in Africa, and that is South Sudan. The country risks fresh sanctions by the United Nations Security Council following a report by a top UN official saying leaders in the country are still, quote-unquote, bent on armed confrontation. Jean Rox, the UN leader, Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, told the Security Council that despite work done by the regional trading bloc, eager to facilitate an agreement on a permanent ceasefire, the parties remain far apart on the issues. He also highlighted the rising cases of sexual violence and increasing cases of aggression against humanitarian agencies and their staff. The Security Council was discussing possible renewal of the mandate of the Sanctions Committee panel of experts on South Sudan to exert pressure on the warring factions there to strike a peace deal. The country has been divided by a political face-off between President Salva Kiir and his then former Vice President Riek Machar that erupted into full war in 2013. Kiir recently called on his exiled former deputy to return to the country, saying the government has now chosen the path of forgiveness. From the youngest nation in Africa, let me take you over to the most populous in Africa, and that is Nigeria. And Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has left Abuja for the United Kingdom to see his doctor. Buhari said the 4-day visit was at the request of his doctor, and that he will be back in the country on Saturday. Now, the leader of Africa's most populous nation has spent over 100 days of 2017 in London, where he had gone for medical leave over an undisclosed ailment. The last known ailment Buhari publicly disclosed was an ear infection for which he sought treatment in London in 2016. He has announced his intention to run for a second and final time in office in an election due in 2019. Of course, a lot of Nigerians are questioning whether he's fit to lead Nigeria and whether he's fit to campaign in the forthcoming general election there. Of course, their critics are saying, why is he even seeking treatment in London and not Nigeria? Of course, that is something that we'll continue to debate about. And of course, Nigerians are going to continue debating about. Now, over to another story here. And the Premier of South Africa's Northwest Province, that is Supra Mahumapelo, has resigned after mounting political and public pressure that led to violent protest against him last month. Mahuma Pello was a political ally of former President Jacob Zuma, replaced in February by Cyril Ramaphosa, who was vowed to clean up governance in Africa's most industrialized economy. Last month, Ramaphosa cut short a visit to a Commonwealth summit in Britain to travel to Northwest and calm tensions there after crowds began protesting against poor public services and demanding Mahuma Pello's resignation. Ramaphosa placed the Platinum MP province, health and treasury departments under central government control and deployed army medics to treat hospital patients. And on that note, Bottomline Africa takes a very short break, but when we return, we'll have a documentary titled Turkish Delight, even as Turkey positioned itself as a global power. We're going to run that shortly for you, but first here is Destination Africa.